Appreciate the journalists who are being respectful of the parliamentary rules with respect to cameras. That's greatly appreciated. Conformément à l'article 108.3G du
Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3G, the committee is undertaking its study of the main estimates 2024-25, Vote 1, under Office of the Auditor General.
From the Office of the Auditor General, Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada; Andrew Hayes, Deputy Auditor General; Jean-René Drapeau, j'ai bien dit ça, oui, Assistant Auditor General; and Paul-Annie Pierre, Assistant Auditor General. Thank you for joining us here today, everyone. Appreciate seeing you all again. It's like you're becoming family. Ms. Hogan, you'll have the floor for 5 minutes. Over to you, then we'll go to questions from the members. Thank you.
Excellent. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We're very pleased to have this opportunity to discuss the work of our office, including the most recent departmental reports. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. The Office of the Auditor General of Canada serves Canada primarily through auditing and other work that assists Parliament in its authorization and oversight of government spending and operations. We provide Parliament and the territorial legislatures with information, objective information, advice, and assurance about government financial statements and the management of government programs. We also assist boards of Crown corporations and audit committees in overseeing the management of government activities. The Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development assists me by focusing on the environment and sustainable development. We also support the development of legislative auditing and accounting standards and contribute to improve the public sector auditing in Canada and internationally. Let me now turn first to our 2022-23 Departmental Results Report. We provided this report to Parliament in November 2023. As shown in our financial statements, our net operating cost was approximately $144 million, and we employed the equivalent of 732 full-time employees. With these resources, we completed financial audits, performance audits, special examinations of Crown corporations, and other reports. In total, we delivered 117 audit reports to federal and territorial legislatures and boards of Crown corporations.
The Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development delivered the annual report on environmental petitions and several other reports related to sustainable development and climate change, and began work on additional reporting requirements under the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. As part of our follow-up work, we updated our online dashboard, which provides a snapshot of the progress that selected departments and agencies achieved in areas we previously audited. As we do every year, we audited the financial statements of 90 federal, territorial, and government organizations and Crown corporations, including those of the Public Accounts of Canada. We issued clean opinions on 87 of these financial statements. We also presented our annual commentary on our financial audit work. Our departmental results report presents indicators that measure our performance and the impact of our audit work. One of the ways that we have historically assessed our impact of our performance audit work is through the level of parliamentary engagement with our reports. In the 2022-23 fiscal year, parliamentary committees reviewed 88% of our federal and territorial performance audit reports, up from 80% in the prior year. I want to thank the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for reviewing all of the performance audit reports referred to it during this period, and for reviewing 2 reports of the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development. Internally, in 2022 and 23, we made progress on initiatives to review and renew the foundations of our work. This included enhancing our processes for selecting performance audit topics to reinforce the relevance of our work for Canadians, legislatures, and the entities we audit. We also made progress on modernizing our IT infrastructure, reducing our environmental footprint, and supporting a healthy and inclusive workplace culture. I would like to move now to our main estimates and our departmental plan for the next fiscal year. In the previous departmental plan, we introduced our updated departmental results framework. This framework articulates revised results and the indicators we will use to measure our progress. In this departmental plan, we added targets to our indicators, and we will be reporting on the results of these indicators for the first time in the next departmental results report. For the 2024-25 fiscal year, our total budget is approximately $128 million. With these resources, we plan to employ the equivalent of 770 full-time employees. During this period, we plan to issue 90 financial audits, 25 performance audits, and 3 special examinations. These reports are planned on a wide breadth of topics, such as cybersecurity of government networks and systems, the Canada Emergency Business Account, and critical minerals and batteries. During the 2024-25 fiscal year, we will continue to work on several ongoing internal initiatives, such as our engagement with interested parties, our transformation journey, and initiatives to sustain and further develop a skilled, diverse, and engaged workforce. All of these initiatives are fundamental to delivering value to those we audit and meeting the needs of legislatures and people living in Canada. Mr. Chair, I would like to acknowledge the committed, hardworking, and devoted team of professionals in my office. I am incredibly proud of the excellent work that we deliver every day. We thank the committee for its ongoing support and the use of our work, and we would be pleased to answer any questions committee members may have.
Thank you very much, Auditor. Before I turn to Mr. Stewart, just if for those of you on the earpiece, that I think there was a crack or a crackle. The translators have asked just be careful with the headpieces close to your phones. Even I'm trying to determine if it's the microphone or the earpiece. But if you can just be aware of that. So, Mr. Chen, maybe hold your phone away from the microphone, not quite right on. You can hold it. That's fine. But just watch out. There's an audio issue, and we do not want to harm our translators. Mr. Stewart, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to welcome Auditor General Hogan and your team here today. We truly appreciate the great work that you do every day to assist this committee and Parliament in our oversight of government spending and operations. It's a challenging task you have with the Liberal government's $480 billion in program spending and running an annual $40 billion deficit. I believe the work you've done to uncover the historic levels of corruption and fraud associated with the ArriveCan scandal will have a lasting legacy. Your recent report reminds me of the work of Canada's first female Auditor General, Sheila Fraser, whose report on the sponsorship scandal rocked Canada's political scene during the last Liberal regime. Auditor General Fraser stated the troubling transfer of hundreds of millions of dollars in sponsorship funds used highly questionable methods. She also referred to the Liberal sponsorship scandal as a pivotal event with a lasting impact and broke just about every rule in the book. Her quotes sound very familiar to your comments to this committee about ArriveCan. In a 2011 speech, Madam Fraser also criticized the truly shocking lack of improvements on First Nations reserves, and she said, and I quote, "I actually think it's quite tragic when you see that there is a population in this country that does not have the sort of basic services that Canadians take for granted." I've seen this up close as Minister of Aboriginal Affairs in my own home province of New Brunswick. Your recent reports on housing in First Nations communities and on policing show a lot of similarities to Auditor General Fraser's comments, which is very unfortunate to see a lack of progress over the past 9 years. The Office of the Auditor General has stated it is committed to improving socio-economic outcomes for Indigenous peoples by increasing opportunities for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis businesses in its procurement processes. For example, you have stated plans to award a minimum of 5% of the total value of all contracts to Indigenous businesses. Because of the egregious misuse of Indigenous set-asides your ArriveCan audit has uncovered, can I ask if you have considered taking a deeper look at the 5% program, and have you put in place a directive that your office not subcontract with Dalian Enterprises and David Yo?
So I can start off by letting you know that we have never had contracts with Dalian Enterprises. We have a plan, as you stated, to help meet the 5% minimum target that the government has set. This past year, I would say, didn't achieve the levels we were hoping to achieve. And part of that was because, as a result of our audit work, we have introduced an extra layer of rigor, an extra layer of examination to ensure that the organizations that we contract with are truly Indigenous organizations. We don't want to just issue a contract to an organization that might be a joint venture and was awarded the contract just to meet a set-aside. We truly want to make sure that the work we're giving goes to Indigenous people. And so we're going to work hard at trying to meet our commitment, but it's more important for me to make sure that it's done in the right way. Based on what we found, we're also considering whether we want to audit this government-wide, and we haven't really landed on that yet.
Okay, appreciate that answer. Also this week, the Treasury Board of Canada's Secretariat provided this committee a report on federal government employees double dipping as contractors to the Liberal government. Another disturbing trend you uncovered in the ArriveCan audit. With the work still underway, so far 76 organizations in the core public administration have reported 140 federal employees who are double dipping as contractors to the Liberal government. If I recall, you were quite upset to discover 2 or 3 Office of the Auditor General employees were double dipping as well. Can you tell us how you became aware of these employees and what process unfolded once you were made aware?
So I'll ask Andrew to provide you a bit more details. What I can tell you is we're aware. We've continued to sort of look and run procedures internally. I can tell you that I'm aware of 5 cases within my organization, 3 where employees had contracts with other government departments, and 2 of our contractors who are either employees or contractors with other departments. And I'll ask Andrew if he can give you a bit more detail about that.
Yes, thank you. I would distinguish between employees who have come forward to disclose the fact that they may have external employment and that receive proper approval for that versus ones that don't. And the cases that the Auditor General was referring to were largely ones where people did not disclose that they had alternative employment. In one case, we found that there was an employee who had other employment and there was a problem because when we hired them, the secret clearance process signaled that there was a problem. In another case, PSPC advised us that there was an ongoing investigation involving one of our employees and a number of other departments. And in a third case, which is currently being considered, it was another case where it was brought to our attention. In terms of the contractors, one of them was identified in the PSPC disclosure about a month ago. Where there was 3 contractors working for a number of departments and agencies. And the last case was one that we uncovered because we had identified signals that raised red flags. In all of those cases, we have taken prompt and immediate action. We've undertaken investigations where appropriate. And in the ones that have been completed, those contractors either don't work for us anymore or the employees have been, their employment has been terminated.
Thank you very much. That is your time, Mr. Stewart. Next up, Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Actually,
okay. Ms. Yip, that's fine. Ms. Yip, you have the floor.
And she'll be next, yeah. Thank you, Chair, and welcome back. It's good to be discussing the important work that the Office of the Auditor General does for all Canadians. Could you describe, Ms. Hogan, the types of audits undertaken by your office and how they can be utilized effectively in the public policy process?
So we do annual financial audits of the federal government as well as the 3 territorial governments, financial statement audits for many territorial corporations and crown corporations. Those are audit opinions that are given to the boards of directors or to Parliament around whether or not the financial statements accurately present the results of the organization for the year. I would tell you when it comes to the Public Accounts of Canada, it's really that final accountability loop where you get to see what was committed in a budget and then what actually happened in the financial statements for the year. So those would be our financial audits. We do about 90 of those every single year. We also do performance audits. Performance audits are where we go into departments and agencies and at times include crown corporations depending on the program that we might be looking at to determine whether the programs have been managed with due regard to the economy, to efficiency, to the environment, and whether or not management has put in place ways to measure whether these programs have been effective and provided good value for money to Canadians. Very closely linked to a performance audit would be a special examination. It's about the equivalent of a performance audit, but in a crown corporation. The parameters of that, however, are really dictated by the Financial Administrations Act. We must do a special examination for parent crown once every 10 years, and it's about processes. Do they have processes in place to safeguard their assets and deliver on their mandate? We provide all of that to their board, but we also provide that to Parliament so that you could hold crowns accountable for managing their assets and delivering against their mandate. Now, the Commissioner of the Environment will usually issue performance audits. So he does my job, but on the sustainable development and environment side. But then he also has responsibilities out of other acts, like the Net Zero Emissions Act and so on, where he provides other reports to Parliament, which shows whether or not the government is meeting its commitments that it's made for sustainable development.
Thank you.
Oh, petition. Oh, I could tell. Thank you about that. Petitions. We actually, it's not our audit work, petitions, but we do manage the petitions process. And it's one that I'm not sure many Canadians know about. So Canadians can submit an environmental petition, something they might like to know about how the government is handling certain environmental matters. It's submitted to us, and then we ensure that a government receives that a government department receives that petition, and then provides a response to Canadians. So we're really more of an administrative box there, but then we do provide a summary of all petitions received so that Parliament's aware of what Canadians are concerned about when it comes to the environment. So thank you for that.
That's a lot of work, and in many different areas as well. So I would say that funding for your office is probably really important. It allows you to do the work that you've just discussed. During the first year of the Harper government, your budget was $78.6 million, and during the last year, it was only $81.8 million. When Pierre Poilievre was minister responsible for safeguarding our democracy, he did not ensure that officers of Parliament were funding adequately. Can you explain to the committee how your office is funded and what adequate funding means for the work that you do?
So that's a very important question. Our office does seek its funding through the regular parliamentary budget process. So we submit a budget request to the Department of Finance, and it goes through the normal process that every department must go to. You may recall when I was nominated back in early 2020, my office had been looking for additional funding. At that time, I had put in a request as well for funding. We received the money that I had asked for, but I then talked about the need for an independent funding mechanism. And I think this is something that so many agents of parliaments should ensure they have. It is difficult for us to go ask money from a department that we audit. And it should really be an independent mechanism where we can turn to Parliament and have some accountability there. I would tell you that since I received that money back in 2021, we have received additional mandates. that have been unfunded, and so this is a continuous pressure point that my office has. So since 2021, the Commissioner has received a mandate in the Net Zero Emissions Act. There are 5 additional Crown corporations that we have been asked to audit, and none of those audits came with additional funding. So this is something I monitor, and I would tell you that very soon I might be saying that if I don't want to impact the amount of performance audits that I provide to Parliament, it's likely that I'll be needing additional funding.
Chair, how much time do I have?
About 20 seconds.
Okay, very quick question. Has there been any progress since last year made on diversifying senior management positions?
So that's a question I have to admit that we, everyone sitting here as members of senior management, think about and talk about often. I view the employment equity targets as just the minimum that we should meet, and we are exceeding most of them except for representation around Indigenous individuals. But that's our workforce as a whole. When it comes to management, we are still struggling to meet employment equity and equity targets. I would tell you that over the years, we have, it's probably due mostly, in my view, to attrition. So our historical attrition rate has been about 10%. In the past few years, that has dropped to around 4%. But it is much higher in our working level than it is in our management. Management is even less than 4%. So that's an issue that I know that we have to tackle in a real concrete way in the coming months and years. We're very management heavy, and how can I increase diversity in that cadre if there is no turnover? So it's a challenge that we have to face coming forward because we haven't met the equity targets that we've set for ourselves at management.
Thank you very much. Suivant, pour 6 minutes, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
6 minutes, Madame Sinclair de Gagné. Good afternoon, Auditor General and everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm going to get right away into the questions that were asked by Mr. Stewart, my colleague, but in French. With respect to national defense, there was an inquiry that was opened. I'd like to know where that inquiry is at right now. It was about an employee, a public servant who was working for DND, but at the same time was a consultant with your office. I can give you a quick answer. The inquiry at DND really did not deal with an employee in my office, so I don't have any more details than you have. But you talked about an internal inquiry, perhaps with other departments where there were employees occupying 2 functions. Yes, there was an employee that concerned our office at SPAC, at PSPC, and one at Treasury Board. And so who, in that case, conducts the inquiry? In these cases, it was conducted by PSPC. And in the other case of the supplier, it was we who carried it out. And how do you do that? Well, like any other inquiry, we begin with the allegations, and then basically we try to find out the facts, and then we work towards findings and conclusions, and then the actions that could be taken to settle the situation, to rectify it. So you're saying, like all other inquiries, I'm just trying to understand how it works internally, in-house. There's a team in our office, the HR team, in human resources, or perhaps even in the security section. It depends on the nature of the inquiry. And so the person who is leading the inquiry, of course, has no ties at all to the person who is under inquiry. Absolutely. That person must be independent. It certainly would be a problem if there were conflict of interest, and the managers who are responsible would not then be involved in the inquiry. I could say, with respect to your question about who carries out the inquiry, we reach a decision and then we withdraw and let the inquiry run its course. The facts will be established, and if ever somebody wants to question me about the inquiry, I'm not involved. So how can it be then that it has happened several times in your office? Have you put in a new system? We have put in place some controls to avoid situations that would be similar, but I can't really say what it's about, because then it wouldn't be a control, it wouldn't be oversight. But we want to be sure that the employees are aware of our policies, and they are aware of their own responsibilities in terms of possible conflict of interest. This is a conversation that occurs at the beginning of their employment, and then we make it clear. Throughout the government, as well as in my office, we've dropped the ball a little bit, I would say. It's become less daily than was done in the past. Well, with respect to that, and I'd like to hear you on this, you've just said you thought that the ball's been dropped a little bit in different departments. So what would your advice be to the government to rectify this? Well, I think that the clerk has started a process that is very important and that will engage employees. But for us, we ask people throughout the office to attend a training, not just once in their career, but on a regular basis. I don't know how many times it would be, annually or not, but I want them to be aware of the fact that when you become a public servant, you have to be aware of your obligations. We speak to you about your obligations, but you can't back away from them. And there is an annual form, an update, that they deal with. It's a type of memo, an update, where we have questions, we question them, and we encourage them to read the update on the policy, just so they don't lose sight of the policy. Thank you. Next.
You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the Auditor General and their office for the departmental plan and for ensuring that the work of your office can continue. I do want to touch base on some of the items brought forward by some of my colleagues, but before I get into that, I'll ask questions on the relationship between, the incident that several members have already spoken to in regards to what was reported in the public about 2 employees. You spoke, Mr. Hayes also spoke about some of that important work. You also described the annual process that is required for employees. Was it through that annual process and in the reporting of documents that they found out that you were made aware? Did they declare that through this process of annual review, or did your office have another tool to which you were able to review that?
So the 3 employees and the 2 contractors that we mentioned, it was not through our annual process. And as Andrew distinguished, There are employees who have come forward and told us about other employment opportunities that they have, and we've had a dialogue and determined that it isn't a conflict of interest, but we have this well documented. So that would be part of the annual process that happens. Or even if your situation changes, you should be talking with your manager more regularly than that. These 5 cases, people did not disclose to us. And it's because of that seriousness that calls into question, ethics and value judgments that we launched an investigation. We were first made aware. So the first one, we were made aware by PSPC about it. The second one, we were actually hiring an employee, and when we reached out to, I believe it was PSPC as well, to transfer their security clearance as we were initiating our security process, that's when we found out that the security clearance of the individual had been revoked. And this, for me, highlights part of the problem that needs to be addressed government-wide. There's a gap in information, and there's this very siloed approach, and there is valuable information that was held by another department that mine did not know about, and we came across it because we asked. And somehow we have to fill that gap across the public service so that we not only rely on awareness and declaration by employees, but that we also have information that we use to vet and challenge what we're hearing or not hearing. Because it's what you're not hearing that you're more concerned about.
No, exactly. And I think just previous to you coming in here, we had Minister of the Treasury Board here where she actually confirmed to us that there was an instance of this siloing, and that's the language I'm using in her defense, the siloing between the Public Service Procurement Canada and CBSA. In your audit on ArriveCan, you yourself looked at, for example, the issue where PSPC said, hey, CBSA, there's this big issue happening. You shouldn't be doing a non-competitive contract, and maybe you should really make it a competitive contract. When I asked the minister about that directly, she said that it was CBSA's decision, and I did what I could possibly do. This was the CBSA's decision at this point. Is that an example of siloing that really fails Canadians?
So I don't know if I would call that an example of siloing. I think that's an example of the fact that a deputy head is considered the accounting officer of their department. So we are siloed in that every department has an accountable head, the deputy head, and the accounting officer makes these decisions and is responsible for them. You set up your own mechanisms to ensure that you follow policies. But when you have a central agency like Public Service and Procurement Canada, if you're not using them and seeking out their expert advice and guidance, in this case in procurement, you're missing out on an opportunity. But there isn't always an obligation because it's set by thresholds, right? Dollar thresholds about whether or not you need to go to them. So
why didn't your audit, for example, contemplate a recommendation related to that instance alone? PSPC gives the directive. That should be the check and balance Canadians rely on to say, whoa, like this is a big problem. Even PSPC sees that. What recommendation or advice, given 2020, hindsight's 2020, in this particular instance, where I personally believe a grave error took place, where we had an opportunity, it was almost like this flag that was raised where we could have caught this issue before it became as detrimental as it became. What tools could have PSPC had at that instance, rather than just say, hey, CBSA, I got the email return. You said no problem. It's fine. You can go ahead with a non-competitive contract, even though we know at PSPC it's bad. Mm-hmm. Is there a recommendation around maybe some kind of enforcement mechanism for PSPC to say, hey, CBSA, you shouldn't be doing this or we're going to stop you?
Andrew totally wants to answer this question.
Okay, please, so Mr. Hayes.
I'm going to let him. He keeps looking at me. So
you might have the answer to solve decades of liberal and conservative corruption here.
So I think that your question is built on the foundation of quality information. So take, for example, the fact that every organization in the government essentially has the ability to enter into contracts. Not all of those contracts will be known at PSPC. The big ones will be, but not all of them. But in order to find the situations that we're talking about where, say, employees are working for multiple departments or employees have contracts and are subcontractors, et cetera, there needs to be a way to look at quality information, accurate information, monitor it, cross-check it, and the government can do that if it pulls all of that information together. Hopefully, the PSPC's solution of an integrated procurement system will help achieve some of that. And I think that was a response to our audit. We'll be very interested in seeing how that gets implemented.
So just take the choice away. Like, take the choice away of CBSA to be able to be the stamp on it.
Well, I'm not sure that removing delegation for contracting is the solution, because that will have the negative impact of gumming up all of the procurement business. There should be some ability for ministers and the departments to operate in their sphere. But what we do really need to have is a system that allows the government to know what's going on across the way. I would just signal that the siloed issue is not limited to administrative things. Quite frankly, when we talk about horizontal programs that are not run horizontally, where each department sticks in their lane and doesn't collaborate, climate change might be one of those, sustainable development might be one of those, but those sort of situations are all at the root because of the siloed approach of government.
Thank you very much. That is your time. Mr. Viersen, I'm aware of the clock. I'm going to truncate the times a little bit. You have 4 minutes, please.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the Auditor General for being here again today. I note that for the 2024-25 budget, there's a planned spending of $127.5 million. That's a 5% decrease from the previous fiscal year. Could you explain why that would be?
So I, as an accountant, even I find some of these things confusing, the way estimates work here in the budget. So I would tell you, on average, our office's budget is about $130 million. It ebbs and flows based on the timing of things, retroactive payments for employees. So it is still the same budget. Like, my budget doesn't change every year. It's just a matter of what year things might fall into. I don't know, Jean-René, if you wanted to add anything?
Oh, it's mainly caused by adjustments throughout the year. In our case, I would say it's mostly salaries. Retro payment, for example, for that are dated like 2-3 years back that are now paid in a specific fiscal year. That's why you see those ups and valleys.
I would anticipate with inflation, your demand for funds would go up. Would that be a fair assessment?
So normally the way it works is that if economic increases are announced across our unrepresented employees, if we wait for the Treasury Board to give us the okay to match those, then Treasury Board funds it, and you'll see our main estimates increasing to deal with that. When it comes to our represented employees, Treasury Board will fund in accordance with their envelope the mandates that's negotiated. So in the end, I'm always waiting for Treasury Board to give me the additional funding to deal with economic increases that result as of inflation. Inflationary increases on expenditures, I have to find on my own in my budget.
As we get like technological advancements, I can imagine things in some instances getting harder to audit, but in other cases getting much easier to audit. Blockchain technology, smart contract technology, some AI just around pulling together patterns that we could see, that we can see now. But if we could have pulled those patterns together and would have been flagged for you along the way, or flagged for a minister. Do you see the government using any of that kind of technology, or have you ever recommended that kind of use of that kind of technology?
So we definitely see that the government is trying to move into that sphere. Some are. I would tell you, Statistics Canada is doing a lot of great work when it comes to data analytics. A lot of the outdated systems that the government currently has are a bit of a detriment. And I know even in our organization over the years, when we had limited funding and had to try and meet the needs of Parliament, we stopped investing in our IT, which created a need back in 2017 for funding, which was part of the funding that I requested in 2021, was to help deal with our systems that had been neglected, for lack of a better word, for many years. And you're right, as you move through this, the cost of all this becomes exponentially higher. Technology is more expensive and it continues to change. And I think that's why if you look at some of our audits around IT, the need for more nimbleness in funding IT projects, even if it applies to my organization or the government in general, is one that I think is inhibiting the government moving forward and trying and doing more in this sphere, because it's hard to access funding for this.
I would just push back on, I think sometimes the technology can actually make it cheaper to access some of these things. So thanks.
Can, except you have to transition to it, you have to train people, you have to maintain it, and depending on where you put that technology, if it's in the cloud, there's an ongoing cost other than just that initial investment. So it's thinking about the life cycle costing that I don't think's always thought through well when it comes to funding.
Thank you. That's your time. Mr. Chen, you're up next for 4 minutes, please.
Very much, and thank you to the Auditor General and the witnesses for being here today. Your departmental plan outlines 5 core values that drive how you and your team conduct themselves in their work: democracy and independence, respect for people, integrity and professionalism, stewardship and serving the public interest, and commitment to excellence. How do these core values continue to drive the work that you do and allow you to be a proactive, objective organization in support of Canadians?
So I would highlight that those values, as much as I'd like to say we thought about them, those are the public service values. They are the core values of the public service that every single employee should think about as they go through their day-to-day. We try very much to keep it alive in our organization. And in fact, we just had a little campaign across our organization. We call it our culture compass. So it's the values you need to think about to drive our culture and to drive our work. And we issued little videos for all of our staff to think about what it means to them on a day-to-day basis. We talk about our values a lot, about the behaviors we expect from our employees. It's part of the competency model that we hold our employees to and we evaluate them against on an annual basis. But commitment to excellence is something that we take seriously, and that's why we have rigorous processes to select our audits, to deliver on our audits, and we respect Canadian auditing standards in everything that we do so that Parliament and Canadians can rely on our work because we're committed to it being excellent.
Thank you, Auditor General. You certainly have tremendous experience in this area. You have nearly 20 years of experience with the Office of the Auditor General of Canada, culminating in your current appointment as the AG. How have there been changes in priorities and continuous improvement in the way that the Office of the Auditor General conducts its work? More specifically, how have you worked to enhance service delivery within your office in your current capacity as AG?
So I've really built on some of the priorities of my predecessors, but we have a real big push since I became Auditor General on ensuring that sustainable development goals are considered in everything that we do. We even try to hold crowns and remind the territorial legislatures, even though they haven't signed on to the sustainable development goals in a formal way. We also have committed to using an EDI lens, an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens in all of our work. So we try to think about regional distribution, employment equity, and you'll see a lot of our audits are chosen that way as well. Our racialized employees, many of our Indigenous work. So we try really hard to keep that lens so that we can make sure that we think about all Canadians when we carry out our work. So those would be 2 big mainstreams that I have definitely tried to push and keep alive. I also hold the view that when we audit a department or an entity, we should then look at what we are doing. Because if we're going to make recommendations for an organization to improve, chances are we might not be doing as well either. And so we're trying to adopt those recommendations even in our own organization to improve our own processes.
Fantastic. And in examining the work that is being done through the lens of sustainable development goals and equity, diversity, and inclusion, and looking at differences within regions, how what is your perception in terms of how departments themselves have initiated their own work to further these very important goals that Canada believes in, and certainly your department believes in?
Well, I will definitely see if Andrew wants to jump in on this. For a while, he was our interim commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development, so he probably has some thoughts for sure. I think that many departments, as we've shown through all of our audits, really talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, but then have a hard time figuring out how they contribute to them or how they could measure whether or not they're actually having a positive contribution to Canada's commitments. And when individual departments aren't doing that, it's hard to take a step back as a whole of government and see if Canada is meeting it. So I think there's a lot of work there to do, not just talking about the goals, but actually trying to measure and think about how programs are impacting them.
Thank you. I'm going to have you hold off.
That's okay. I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chair. You're letting us
go
on and on, so thank you.
So you're very welcome. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair Desagné pour 2 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
2 minutes, Madame Sinclair de Gagné. Thank you. As you've seen so clearly, ArriveCan, thanks to your report, we've been able to just scratch the surface of what happened with ArriveCan. How are you then going to explore certain questions? For example, the double dipping that was mentioned several times today. Businesses that don't deliver any service at all, and other instances over the past 15 years where problems have arisen. How are you going to look at that and make solid recommendations? You started by asking how might we change our report, I think, and in the context of what happened with ArriveCan. Well, we begin and we finish an inquiry. I can say that when you look at reports today, you ask yourself, is there something that we should be looking at through the lens of what happened with ArriveCan? This is something different, the market approach, conflict of interest. And we've changed our programs a little bit to see if we can scratch away at the surface to see if there is something else there. That's affected our approach. Yes, but I'm thinking to the future, larger studies, future studies that you might be able to undertake thanks to ArriveCan. Well, if we want to be able to do that, we also have to back up and conduct a horizontal study. It depends also on the government's response to our findings. We have to give them the time to adjust and reflect. But I think it's a good moment to reflect on these particular matters briefly. Well, I agree. I do agree with what you've said, but for most businesses that aren't in the position that you say described, that they would have to provide the necessary, if you're going to do a performance analysis of what is the present status. Yes, but Mr. Chair, I do think that there is work that has to be done in terms of government procurement. There are many, in fact, a lot of regulations that the government is adding on. Sometimes it could become too complicated in terms of regulations. Do you want to avoid them, or do you want to improve them? The Ombuds is working on that, and my department is working, but we don't want to duplicate work done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to speak to the recommendation you made, Ms. Hogan, on an independent funding mechanism. I think it's important that Canadians try to understand why that's important. And, of course, for members of Parliament, including myself, it's important we understand why it's important to see an independent funding mechanism. Now let's just rewind the clock a little bit. At the time to which your office, the Office of the Auditor General, didn't have the kind of funding it needed to achieve the goals it did. When I first became a member of Parliament earlier this session, you came to us when we first met asking for more support and working for more money. And at that time, of course, there's a deep connection between accountability and the Auditor General's office. If the Auditor General's office can't perform the audits, then a government can't accept recommendations. Worse yet, we can't hold the government accountable. And so it's really important, the Office of the Auditor General, which is why it's one of the oldest offices in the country. It's what made our country, makes Canada very highly democratic and a very valuable democratic contribution to the world. What is the relationship, you think, between a government that would fund the Office of the Auditor General versus a government that would not fund the Office of the Auditor General? What impacts would that have to your service and to your work?
I know that Andrew wants to add here. I guess I will just mention that in 2028, my office will be celebrating its 150th anniversary. So it has been it has been around for a very long time, and it is an important institution to our democratic system. Absolutely. And Andrew will talk a bit more about funding mechanisms and the importance of that.
Maybe before you go, Andrew, just for the context I'm trying to get to.
Mr. Desjardins, why don't we hear the answer?
Okay.
No, I'm trying to get a context here, if I can. I'll be really quick.
Brief, if you can be very brief, yes.
Yes. Just the context related to the direct connection between accountability and a government that has to decide how much money you get. Let's say we rewind the clock, go to the Harper era, look at, you just mentioned, you didn't have enough money during that time to perform the audits. Does that damage the Office of the Auditor General's ability to actually have good maintenance?
So I think I would like to answer that question by saying that the role of the Auditor General is critical to democracy. We bring forward impartial, objective, independent advice. We make our recommendations on the basis of facts that have been cleared, and they have been certified by the departments themselves as accurate. Ultimately, when it comes to our funding, it is difficult to go to a government and say, give us more money so that we can critique you. It's difficult. That's where the role of the parliamentary committees comes in. And this committee in particular, in a series of governments, has shown itself to be an incredible ally to the Office of the Auditor General and an ally to democracy. It was because of the work of this committee, even before 2020, where it was because of the work of this committee that we got our funding. Quite frankly, it was the pressure that this committee put on the government, and I would refer the members to the report that was submitted by this committee to Parliament in the previous Parliament that was signaling the importance of independent funding mechanisms. But I would just highlight that this committee does great work for democracy, and the importance of nonpartisanship and support for the Auditor General is not lost.
Thank you very much. Mr. Stewart, you have the floor for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This week, the Treasury Board Secretariat provided the Public Accounts Committee with a shocking summary of the contracts that GC Strategies, Dalian Enterprises, and Coradix Technology Consulting have had with the federal government. There were 1,108 contracts in total, with a value of more than $914 million. Just 3 companies closing in on $1 billion is very concerning to us, but not apparently to the government, especially on top of the more than $120 million in untendered contracts the Liberal government has handed to McKinsey and Company. Can I ask your thoughts on the massive amounts of questionable contracts to outside consultants, and when do you expect your McKinsey review will be completed?
So my office is in the process of clearing the facts with the entities involved in our professional services contract. It is a lengthy one. There are 10 departments and 10 crown corporations included in that. Our goal is very soon to have that tabled before Parliament rises for summer break. So that is our goal, so that the Parliament has the opportunity to hold some hearings on it. What are my views on using external consultants? I think that it matters. At times it's needed, and at times there should be a bigger challenge on it. For example, my office will use a professional service contract to supplement when we have a peak and we don't have staff to do all of the audit work that we might need, or we might use a professional service contract to get expertise, like actuarial expertise, where we don't have enough work to keep someone busy 365 days a year. So at times it makes sense, and at other times I think there's bigger scrutiny that's needed on the use of contractors.
Thank you for the answer. You will probably not be surprised by my next question. Since your last appearance, this committee has received more information about the National Capital Commission's $8 million barn doggle, including detailed blueprints. The $8 million barn does, in fact, have a basement. So we now have confirmation the infamous elevator does, in fact, go down, not up. Why the $8 million barn has an elevator is still a very outstanding question, and the secrecy surrounding it is very interesting.
Point of order.
Now, Ms. Shanahan,
Yeah.
you are next. What is the point of order? Citing the standing orders,
Relevance.
please. You know I give latitude. This is an issue this committee has studied. I would ask everyone to come to order, please.
Can I finish, John?
Yes, you have the floor, and we have been so good with the points of order
No,
this
I thought
time.
this
So,
was
Mr.
really good.
Stewart, you've got 30 seconds.
From the blueprints, we learned the $8 million barn does have a car wash bay, a laundry room, 2 washrooms, and believe it or not, a doghouse. Yes, a doghouse. Whose dog? Is it registered? Who owns it? What kind is it? Have you considered doing any further audits of the super secretive National Capital Commission, especially in light of this new information?
I believe in previous testimony, I've told the committee that this is a capital project that the NCC's board approved and in their annual plan, and we don't usually target individual capital asset acquisitions within an organization.
Thank you very much for that merciful answer. Ms. Shanahan, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. And I want to thank the Auditor General again, her entire team, for appearing in front of our committee for the it's the wisdom of the responses that we get, but Chair, I think you'll agree that whatever we hear from the Auditor General, whether it's through the reports or in answer to questions that members bring up, that the answers are measured, they're balanced, there is a lot of work that goes behind those answers. They're not gratuitous. They're not looking for sensationalist headlines. They're not trying to mislead Canadians. We're getting the right time of day when we hear from the team at the Auditor General's office and the Auditor General herself. And in that line, just some of the things that you've said today, Auditor General, around the chronic underfunding of IT projects, which lead to big trouble, as we've seen later on, problematic contracts later on. This idea that being penny wise and pound foolish is somehow the way to handle public finances. We've heard this time and time again, and we've seen this in previous governments. Cheap, it gets what cheap buys, and it's just a disservice to the Canadians. To Canadians and to the use of public taxpayers' money. And what you said just earlier about, piling on of regulations is not necessarily the way to go either. Doubling work being done by different agencies, yourselves, the ombuds, the RCMP, that this is not the way to go. But Conservatives have been quick, and other members have been quick to criticize any institution or office that does not push a narrative that they support. Can you confirm for Canadians here today that your office is free from political interference?
I can tell you that my office, the foundational element is being independent. And that's why it's important that I can choose who we audit, when we audit, and what we audit. And I will always ensure that we have that right. And it is what makes the Auditor General's office unique. I'm always happy to listen to the concerns of parliamentarians, whether they be from the House or the Senate, as we consider what to audit. But it is really important that we are not influenced. And since my tenure, I can tell you that we have freely chosen what we have wanted to audit.
But how does it affect your messaging, Auditor General, when your words are taken out of context time and time again? And we can think of any number of reports that we've had here, but the latest being, of course, around ArriveCan, and the fact that you did in an earlier report find that there was enduring value, that there was value for money in replacing a paper-based system, but in the latest report, of course, that there were gross inadequacies in the documentation and rules cannot be